Hey guys, back with our last of our theories of gender difference. So another theory that answers the question, whoops, my script is pulled down a little bit, which answers the question, where are the women in positions that are different than men? In most, maybe all, situations that we could analyze in society. This is feminist interactionist theory. So rather than the institutional perspective, which says that basically people are turned into archetypal men and women who are treated differently, and that just gets reproduced as you raise children in an institution, the family, that has gender expectations. Just what happens is people are basically cranked through this machine and they don't really have any influence on it. They just end up being the way they're socialized. Interactionist theory takes a different perspective, which is that it starts with the idea of agency. And so the way it looks at any particular situation is you've got men and women, because we're not talking about generic people. Men and women enter into a situation and this is sort of a big article from 1987 called Doing Gender. They perform. And the argument would be that I would walk into a situation and I would perform as a man. I would do things that would signal to everybody that I am acting in a manly way, that's what is expected of me, and therefore I do certain things. I maybe make sure that I don't show a lot of emotionality. I maybe stand up straight, I'll put my shoulders back, whatever. I mean, like, I'm making it as stereotypical as I can. But the idea is that we go into these situations, we perform gender, and the term was doing gender. Now, part of doing gender is doing this difference, which means in my performance as a man, I was supposed to make it clear that I was not feminine. And that's essentially what doing gender means. It's kind of if you remember back to Irving Goffman, the idea here was that you would present a face that you wanted people to accept of you. And the idea behind doing gender, behind feminist interactionist theory, is that part of that face was to be accepted as a man, or for a woman to be accepted as a woman. And they would say that, so any situation you look at, that's what you see. That's where gender comes from. We have expectations that other people have of us, and in order to avoid embarrassment, we try to act as a man or act as a woman. Okay, so here's where, and that's fine. That's like good. We've got that. Here's the issue, though. Agents have control over performance. To say that I have agency says that I could, at any particular moment, decide to not do gender. Now, obviously, there are social repercussions for that. Goffman would talk about, possibly being rejected by your audience. But what I want us to focus on is the sort of in-between space between completely just doing a stereotypical man performance and completely not doing a stereotypical, like acting completely feminine. Like, I could do either of those in any particular situation, but there's this huge space in the middle, and that space is where negotiation can happen. I can decide I want to be a different kind of a man, and where I might have gotten that idea could be from anywhere. I could have seen a different man. I could have seen a performance in a film and decided that's what I wanted to be like. Where it comes from is, it's symbolic interactionism. So where it comes from is from me interpreting symbols somewhere. But if we're focusing on this particular interaction, I can say, yeah, I'm going to perform as this real man, or I'm going to perform as a real man who respects women, or as a real man who shows his emotionality. So I'm demonstrating it by moving my hand slightly this way, but you get what I'm talking about. Between these two poles of real man and real woman, there's a whole bunch of space in the middle. And that is where I like interactionist theory, because what it suggests is in negotiating with any interaction, I can say, okay, I am going to be this kind of a man. And if the other people accept it, then what happens is that kind of way of being a man becomes part of society. It doesn't necessarily become everywhere all at once, but if we think back to the 1980s, when Doing Gender was written, it was written, I believe, in 1987, America is very much kind of traditional in terms of there are men and there are women. I was 17 in 1987, and there wasn't a whole lot of discussion of LGBTQ issues at all. I mean, there were very few people who were openly gay at the time. There was almost nobody who was openly transgender at the time. But that's changed, right? There have become more acceptable ways of being. And the interactionist argument would be, well, somebody at some point said, okay, I am a man or I am a woman, but I'm not going to be that traditional. I'm going to move it slightly this way. And when they do that, a whole bunch of other people suddenly have another option. I can be a real man, or I can be a man who isn't afraid to cry, or isn't afraid to talk about being afraid of things, or isn't afraid to stand up for women when other people are objectifying them, when other men are objectifying them. For a woman, it isn't that I have to objectify myself. It could be that I refuse to accept that men are just going to objectify me. It could be that I step out of the I am supposed to make men feel comfortable idea of womanhood, and I can challenge men. Some people were responsible for doing that because it didn't used to be that way, and now it is. And the interactionist perspective is able to explain that better than the institutional perspective. Remember, the institutional perspective is we get socialized by these institutions and then we replicate. There's no real room for social change in that. But this interactionist perspective, because if my attempt to be a different type of man happens and other people accept it, it suddenly becomes something they can draw on for their next performance. And social change can happen that way. Okay, the last part that I want to talk about with regard to interactionist theory is that, and this comes out from a sociologist named Paula England, who talked about how there has been a lot of change, but there is still a large segment of the population that kind of hangs on to what she calls essentialist understandings. So that there is some male essence to me, some female essence to a woman, and that's why we don't have just complete gender equality. And I guess that sort of is the main thing. The interactionists kind of say, theoretically, we could negotiate ourselves into men can be any sort of way and women can be any sort of way. And maybe we'll get there, but we haven't gotten there. And that is a significant thing that says that, yes, while we do gender, we're doing gender based on sort of a note of enduring culture. There's always some idea or set of ideas of the way men are supposed to be. It's broadened, but it still exists. And it tells you that if it used to be that there's one way to be a man and now let's say there's 10, it still is 10, right? It still is, there is certain things that men are okay to be like and other things that men are not okay to be like. And that's where this idea of interactionism, it's interacting within some sort of stable culture. I go into an interaction and I have a certain set of ideas to draw on, but it's not infinite. All right, that's it. That's it for feminist interactionist theory. In our next video, we're going to move out of theories of gender difference and move into theories of gender inequality. So we'll talk about that in the next video. See you guys then.